So what I'm going to show today is our TracerPlus Connect product and how we can set up both batch or sync profiles and live profiles. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually open our TracerPlus desktop software and actually grab a project from our Solution Center. So I'm going to click on the samples, I'm going to click on asset tracking, and then our asset location audit. So this is an application that we actually provide some database tables for in our Connect sample. We actually provide a sample access database with the TracerPlus Connect install. So this is one of the apps we actually have data for. So I'm going to just import this. So it consists of two sessions, one being scan assets and the other asset list. The idea here is to get our data from our asset list synced up to this asset list on the device. So then we can actually go into the scan assets, select a room here, and then it'll show which assets should be expected in this location. And as we scan them, they'll get removed from the group. So now, the first thing we want to do is jump back over to Connect, and I'm going to create a new project. So a project is going to consist of profiles and processes. So a profile is kind of a grouping of processes that can be triggered at a certain time to sync. So if you're syncing data to the device and then also syncing data from the device, those are things you can actually separate into different profiles so that you can control when you actually sync each one. So the first thing we see here in the Create Profile is the choice of a sync profile or a live profile. So in this case, I'm showing the sync profile first. And one other option we can do here is link our TracerPlus desktop project to this profile. That's going to make things a lot easier in terms of mapping your TracerPlus session to your actual destination database. So to do that, we can simply, first we go back to desktop, we see the name of the project is Assets in Room. So that's the project we're going to link it to. So I'm going to click that folder icon, go to our projects, and then look for our Assets in Room. So here it is, and then we're just going to double click on that TPP, which is our TracerPlus project. And then I'm going to click the Create Profile. So now we can name this profile. So we'll say this is going to be for syncing data to the device. So I'll call this Sync to Device. Then in our process list, I'm going to click this plus button to add a new sync process. So this is going to take the data from a source and move it to a destination. So if we're syncing to the device, our source is going to be our database. So I'm going to choose ODBC. You can also see that we have other options here. You can sync to or from Excel, text, or one of the new features they added recently is directly with Salesforce. So I choose ODBC, and then we're going to get a listing of all data sources defined in Windows on our PC. So I'm going to choose our TracerPlus Connect sample, which is then going to narrow down to the list of, the tables available within that database. So in this case, we're going to choose our asset list, because we're going to sync the asset list data to our asset list on the device. So our destination is going to be the device. We want to sync that to TracerPlus. And then because we linked that desktop project, in our session table or drop-down list here, we can actually see the only two sessions that are available within that project. If we didn't link that project, we would see a generic listing of 32 sessions. So that's why it's helpful to link that project. So I'm going to choose our asset list. And once we set up the source and destination, you'll see some mappings take place below. So what you want to do is marry those up so that they match. So you'll see we have an ID going asset ID, so that's not correct. So we can use these controls up top here to kind of adjust some of these mappings. So I'm just going to remap that status field. So now we have all of our fields mapped correctly to one another. One important note on the destination side is the options. So we can choose how we want to post this data or sync this data to the device once it gets there. So we can keep appending to that data, we can overwrite that data, or we can update that data based on a certain set of fields. In this case, we're just going to overwrite. And also, there are some options on the source side. So we can choose to delete data after a successful transfer, and we can also add source filtering to only sync data that matches certain criteria. We're not going to do that in this case, so we're just going to sync that asset list up to the device. So we have our profile defined, our process defined. Actually, we'll name this process sync asset list. One other thing I want to define here is a drop-down field. So we can actually sync data from a database table to a drop-down field on your device. So I'm going to add a second process here to our profile, and we'll call this sync location dropdown. So once again, our source is ODBC. We're going to choose our TracerPlus Connect sample, and we're going to choose our asset locations table. For our destination, we're going to choose TracerPlus. We want to sync this to our scan asset session because that's the session that contains our location dropdown. So now in the table, we can actually see not only is there session data we can sync, but if that session has a drop-down field, you'll see that option in the table list. So I'm going to sync this to our location dropdown. So then for the mappings, we just simply want the location field in our table to go to our display value in our dropdown. And once again, this should be usually set to an overwrite. So now I'm just going to save that project. We'll call it asset demo. And now what we want to do is jump back over to desktop and deploy this project over to our device. So I have a connected device here that I'm actually controlling from my PC. So once I deploy this, we should see a different set of icons on the device. All right, so once that's deployed, TracerPlus will auto-launch on your device. And let me just check for stray data. So let me just remove this. So here's our asset list and scan assets session. So you'll see in our location drop-down, we currently have a bunch of locations already because we can actually define these drop-downs in desktop as well. So now what we want to do is define how we're going to get this data to the device. If you wanted to go via cradle, you can simply jump over to the synchronize page here and then click one of these sync buttons. So sync all will sync all the processes defined in this profile. If you wanted to sync each one individually, you could just simply select it and click on the sync selected. So that's something you can do for sort of a true batch sync where you're actually cradled to a PC. We can also control the sync from the device by adding a sync button. So actually what we like to do sometimes is add a third session called sync. And that doesn't really need any fields, so we'll remove all but one, and we'll start with a blank canvas. And what we'll do is just add a sync button here. So maybe we'll call it sync to device. And we're going to set its button action to do sync. So once we do that, you'll see a couple settings here for sync settings. One of them is choosing a host ID that this should sync to, and then also the profile in Connect that it should be syncing. So the first thing we want to do is define our Connect settings within desktop, and that's located in our project settings and then Connect. So we want to add a host here. So if we want to do this sync wirelessly, we would add the host name or IP address of the PC or server that would be running the Connect software. If you still want to do a button sync via cradle, you would set this to PPP_peer. So that would know to make that sync connection over that USB connection. But in this case, we'll do a wireless sync. So we'll set this to my IP address. And then the default port for Connect is 4403. So you'll see here we have a host ID of 1. So if you had Connect running on multiple PCs, you could actually define multiple hosts here so that you could perform different syncs to different PCs. In most cases, you'll only have one host since most of your syncing can be separated by different profiles. So there's our host ID of 1. So if we jump back over to our Do Sync button, we can set that sync host ID to 1. The next thing is our profile ID. So if I jump over to Connect into our configure, you'll see up top here next to the profile name that each profile has a unique ID. So this being the first profile, we have an ID of 1. When I add a second profile, that ID would be 2, and then we can control with a button, when to sync one profile versus the other. So our sync profile ID will be 1 in this case. So now I'm just going to redeploy this to my device. And once this gets deployed, we're going to go ahead and sync that asset list data to our connected device. So another aspect of Connect is our data viewer. So this is a built-in utility to actually view your database. This isn't a database provided, this isn't an actual database that Connect is storing data to. This is that database defined in your destination. So this is our access table. We're actually viewing our asset list. So we can see 16 assets in here. And then here's our listing of locations. So if we jump back over to synchronize, and then we jump over to sync, and then sync to device, we're going to see some activity take place in the background that the sync is taking place. So you'll see it's completed the 2 of 2, which is the 2 processes. So now if we look at our asset list, we see our 16 records have been synced over to our device. So now if I were to go into our scan assets, we'll also see our drop downs here. So if I select room 101 and start scanning some assets, they're going to start coming off that list. So the next thing we want to do is set up a new profile there where we can sync this collected data back to our database. So we actually have a table for asset transactions, as well as being able to update this asset list of when an item was scanned and its status. So if we jump back over to our configure, we're going to add another profile. It's going to be a sync profile. We're going to point to that same project. So that's our assets in room. We're going to create that profile. We'll call this one sync from device. And then we'll add a few processes to this. One will be sync asset scans. And in this case, the source is going to be TracerPlus because we're syncing from the device. So our destination will be ODBC, the TracerPlus Connect sample, and we're going to go to our asset audits table. So we're just going to map up our fields here. So we don't need asset ID in here. We're just basically capturing that a scan took place at this location and whether all assets were found or not. So we're just going to match these up. And in this case, we're going to append the data to that table, and then we're also going to delete it on a successful sync. So this way, on a successful sync, these are transactional data, so we don't want to keep that on the device. So we can automatically remove that after the sync. The next thing we want to do is update our asset list. So once again, our source is TracerPlus. Our session is going to be asset list because that's where we're going to sync it from. And we're going to sync it to, once again, our TracerPlus Connect sample, our asset list table, and let's just marry these fields up. So this is where the different post type would come into play. So we can do an update existing based on the asset ID. What this will do is if once during a sync, if the asset ID is found, it'll update the contents of that row if they have changed. The one downside to this is if you actually added new assets on the device, it's not going to add those new assets to your table. So that's why we added this update existing append if not found. So we'll do that same update functionality, but we'll also add new assets that may have been added on the device itself. In this case, we don't want to remove it from the device because it's our asset list, so we want to keep that static on the device. So I'm just going to save that. And just to show you the reason I'm syncing the asset list is because during that actual transaction on the PDA, we were doing a lookup update source to update that asset list data on the device itself. So now if we can just copy this button on our sync form here, and we'll call it sync from device. And then the only thing we need to change here is that we want it to sync profile ID 2, which is our sync from device profile. So that's how you can control when things are synced. So I'm just going to push that out to our device again. And once that's pushed over, we'll do that sync and show you how the data comes back over to the database. We'll go to our sync session. We'll bring up Connect again and look at our sync tab so we can see our activity. I'm going to click sync from device. So you'll see some activity take place in the background. And there's our 2 of 2 processes successful. And if we look on our device, we should see that our scan assets, it removed that record that we had. And if we jump over to our data viewer and do a refresh, you'll see that it updated our database with those 4 items we scanned with the scan date and the status of found. And then if we jump over to our sync from device profile, we should see our 1 record here that we did an audit on 9/16 of room 101 and all assets were found. So that's the basics I wanted to show you for a sync profile. One other thing I can mention, Brad mentioned about some, speeding up syncs, some tips for that. If you look in the advanced section on the TracerPlus side of the mapping, you'll see that we have a settable records per message. So we find that if you set this to 100, that you'll get the shortest sync times and the best sync performance. You can experiment with going a little higher to see if it'll improve even further. But we find that at 100 seems to be a pretty good starting point for that. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is setting up a live profile. So the type of session I'm going to use to demonstrate this is from our sample once again. So I'm going to go to our samples, I'm going to go to inventory control, and then our inventory issue and receive. So I'm going to import that. So we have 3 sessions here. So we're going to have a product list or a list of products. And then we're going to be able to receive product and issue products to or from certain stock rooms. So this may be a good thing to use in live mode, as you'd want to know right away, the current quantities that you have on hand, for customer purposes, or if you need to ship out product or need to order product. This is a good real-time scenario that as transactions are submitted, it updates that quantity right away, so you can act on it that much faster. All right. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to add ID fields to each of these, and I'll explain why that's important when I start defining the actual profile. So once again, we're going to come over to our Connect settings so we can define our host again. Once again, I'm going to set this to my PC. So the one thing different we're going to do here is jump over to this Live Sessions tab. And what we can do is add each session that we want to behave or act in live mode or real-time mode. So I'm going to add all 3 of these sessions. So simply click this plus button, select your session, and then select that host ID. This one's going to be issue product. This is going to be our same host ID. And then we want our view product list and host ID. So now these 3 sessions are going to be enabled for real-time mode once we deploy this to the device. So you'll also see a profile I can use here as well. So since we already have 2 profiles, I'm going to add a 3rd one, and this is going to be a live profile. Oops. So actually, you'll see here what happens if we don't marry a desktop project to the profile. You just get a generic listing of the 32 sessions. So I'm just going to remove that real quick and re-add it. And we'll check our project name here, which is Inventory Manage V6. So I'm just going to choose that project from our list here. As you can see, I have a lot of projects. So we'll select that and click our Create Profile. So now you'll see that our session list is only going to contain those 3 sessions that are within that project. So we can name this profile. We'll call it Inventory Manager. And now we can start defining each of these sessions in our list. So this is a little different from a sync profile where you're not actually configuring a source and destination. Since the source, or basically one of the source or destinations, is always going to be TracerPlus, so the only thing you need to set in a live profile is the data source itself. So you can choose from ODBC, Excel, or text. So once we choose ODBC, we're going to see a similar settings as we saw in the sync profile. We have our ODBC data source. We'll choose our Connect sample. We'll choose our table. So once again, this is one of the sessions that we include some sample tables for. So this is our received product, so we're going to map that to our product received table. And we'll configure our mappings accordingly. Move this up, and this should be mapped to our date. And I'm also going to add our ID field to this mapping. So even though this is not visible on the device, it's important to map this for editing purposes, because it's really the only true way that we can identify that this is the correct record to edit or modify. So if we're actually editing this record and we submit a change, because that ID field's mapped, we know the exact record that we should be modifying. So this ID field, this could be a key field. In this case, it's just our ID field, but it could be something different in your database. So we also need to add that key field. In this case, it's going to be ID. So we're going to do the same for our issue products, ODBC, our TracerPlus Connect sample. And we should have a product issue table. Add our key field of ID. Adjust our mappings. And then we'll finally do the same for our product lists. So we should have a product list session here, key field ID. This could actually be a combination of key fields. So if I wanted to, I could set this to location and part number, but I'm just going to leave it ID. All right, so I'm just going to save that. So here's our 3 processes defined for live mode. So the one thing we're going to do is I'm just going to clear out some of the data on this device. Let me clear out our asset lists. Since we're actually using live mode, we're not actually going to be syncing or storing data to the device. We're going to be talking directly with these databases that we have set up in the mappings here. So if we look at this profile, it has an ID of 3. So we just need to jump back over to our desktop settings and change our live sessions to use profile ID 3. Then we'll just deploy that over to our device. And we should now see some different sessions on our device. So if I were just to come to the data viewer here, and I'll jump over to it in Connect as well. So if we look at our product list, here's what we have. So if I click this View Product List, you'll actually see at first it'll show you some batch data that may exist on this session. But once it connects in live mode, you'll see that it loaded those 8 records that we have in our table here. So now I can go to our received product. So you'll see that once it connects, you'll see an icon down here, this blue icon. You'll see with the little wavy icons here, that means that you're connected in live mode. So if we scan a part number, it's going to look up that description from our product list table. Then we can choose a receive to location. So we'll choose stockroom 1, and it'll show you our current quantity on hand. So you'll also see that here. This is what I just scanned. Here's our quantity on hand of 15. And let's say I add another 15 to that. We're going to receive 15, and once I hit save, once that submits, we should see our quantity on hand here jump to 30. So there it is in real time. As soon as it was posted on the device, it's been updated in our database. So we can also look at the received product, and we should also see a transaction come across for that particular scan we just did. So I could do the same thing if I scan the same item and choose a different stockroom. This one has 8. Let's say we add 9 to that, so that should bring our total to 17 once submitted. So that's this field right here. So now we have that quantity updated to 17. And if we look at received product, once again, we'll see that new transaction has been added. We can do the same for the issued products. Let's say we want to issue 124124 from stockroom 1. So we have a quantity of 15. Let's issue a quantity of 8. So that should leave us with 7. So that's this one right here. And once I refresh that, there's our updated quantity of 7. And then if we look in our issued product table, we have our new transaction here that we just did. Now, as Brad also mentioned, you can actually edit a record. So let's say you're in the product list. Maybe you're doing an audit or something. So if we viewed the product list, we can actually edit one of these records. Let me grab our first record here. And maybe we change this to 45. So you'll see that we edited that record in real time and updated our quantity on hand of 45. So that's something you can also do in the field, although I imagine most of the transactions will be done via lookups or update source. But you do have the ability to just bring up a record, edit something, and submit it, and it will update your destination that was defined. So one other thing in live mode, as you saw here when I first went to the data viewer, you did see some local data on the device. So if you do happen to lose connection, or you're in an area where connectivity is poor, submitted data will actually store locally on the device until you reconnect to wireless. So this is a lot more seamless for those of you who have used wireless server in the past. So it'll actually sync that data automatically over for you once that connection is reestablished. So that's one of the benefits of the new Connect Live mode versus our old wireless server products. So that's pretty much what I wanted to cover today. I hope this gave you some ideas and enables you to use Connect in a better way. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I hope you got a lot from this. And once again, it will be posted to our training videos page as well as our YouTube page. So if you missed this, you can grab it there. But thanks everyone for attending, and have a good day.